Kethvar had lived for 300 cycles, fought in countless battles across 12 star systems, and earned the title of war singer among his people. The Velnari were known throughout the galaxy as fierce warriors, their crystalline armor reflecting the light of distant suns as they charged into combat with songs of glory on their lips. Yet as he stood on the bridge of the human vessel Defiant Dawn, watching the tactical display show thousands of Zephyrian ships approaching their small fleet, Kethvar felt something he had never experienced before. Uncertainty. The humans around him moved with a strange calm that unsettled the veteran warrior. Captain Sarah Chun stood at the center of it all, her small frame dwarfed by the massive holographic display showing their dire situation. 12 human ships against a Zephyrian armada that stretched beyond the scanner's edge. By any reasonable military calculation, they should have retreated hours ago. "Captain," called out Lieutenant Morrison from the communications station, his voice steady despite the odds. "The Zephyrian fleet is broadcasting on all frequencies. They're demanding our immediate surrender." Captain Shin barely glanced at the display. Standard response, "Morrison, tell them we're busy." Several alien officers on the bridge exchanged glances. Kethvar's mandibles clicked in confusion. He had joined this human fleet as part of the Galactic Defense Pact, expecting to fight alongside competent allies. What he had found instead were beings that seemed to treat warfare like some kind of elaborate joke. "Sir," Morrison continued, "they're also broadcasting casualty projections. They estimate 97% casualties if we engage." "Only 97? Chun raised an eyebrow. Their math department must be slipping. Last time they promised 99.8%. She turned to face the bridge crew, and Kethvar was struck by how young she looked. Humans lived such brief lives, yet they placed children in command of warships. The Velnari warrior stepped forward, his massive form casting shadows across the tactical display. "Captain Chun, perhaps we should consider a strategic withdrawal. My people have fought the Zephyrians before. Their technology is superior, their numbers overwhelming." Chun looked up at him with those strange human eyes, a pale blue that reminded him of ice worlds. "Commander Kethvar, how many battles have you won by retreating?" "None," he admitted. "But how many have you won by facing impossible odds?" A smile played at the corners of Chen's mouth. "All of them." Before Kethvar could respond, the proximity alarms began screaming. The Zephyrian fleet had moved into engagement range, their sleek ships gleaming like silver daggers against the star field. Each vessel was easily twice the size of the human destroyers, their hulls bristling with weapons that could punch through most known armor like tissue paper. "All ships, battle stations," Chen announced calmly. "Execute Plan Whiskey." Kethvar had studied human military terminology extensively, but Plan Whiskey was new to him. What exactly does Plan Whiskey entail? "Oh, nothing too complicated," Chen replied, settling into her command chair. "We're going to make them very, very angry." The human fleet began moving in what appeared to be random patterns, ships breaking formation and scattering like frightened prey. Kethvar's honor as a warrior was offended by such apparent cowardice. The Zephyrians clearly thought the same, as their formations tightened, confident they were pursuing a routed enemy. "First wave is moving to intercept the Meridian," reported the tactical officer. 6 heavy cruisers and a battleship. "Perfect," Chun said, leaning forward with interest. "Morrison, patch me through to Captain Rodriguez." The communication crackled to life. "Rodriguez here, Sarah. These bugs are taking the bait beautifully. Remember, Marcus, wait for them to get nice and close before you spring the surprise." "Understood." Rodriguez out. Kethvar watched in growing confusion as the human destroyer Meridian appeared to flee desperately from the pursuing Zephyrian ships. The enemy was closing fast, their weapons charging for what would surely be a decisive blow. At the last possible moment, when the Zephyrians were nearly on top of the smaller ship, Captain Rodriguez made his move. The Meridian didn't turn to fight. Instead, it accelerated directly toward the largest Zephyrian battleship, its engines burning at maximum output. Kethvar realized what he was seeing just as the human ship disappeared in a brilliant flash of light. "Ramming speed," he breathed. "They destroyed themselves?" "Not exactly," Chen replied, watching the tactical display with satisfaction. The explosion had taken out 2 of the Zephyrian cruisers and severely damaged the battleship, but more importantly, it had disrupted their formation. The crew evacuated 30 seconds before impact. Emergency pods are already being recovered by the Salvation. The Velnari warrior stared at the display. In 300 years of warfare, he had never seen a commander willingly sacrifice a warship just to damage the enemy. The humans had just thrown away millions of credits worth of military hardware for what amounted to a tactical advantage. Was that supposed to intimidate them? Kethvar asked. "Oh no," Chen laughed. "That was just to get their attention." "Morrison, are the Zephyrians responding as predicted?" "Yes, ma'am. They're demanding to know if we're insane. Apparently, they've never encountered kamikaze tactics before." "Excellent. Send them our formal response." Morrison's fingers danced over his console. "Response sent, Captain." "What did you tell them?" Kethvar found himself asking, though he was beginning to suspect he wouldn't like the answer. Chen's smile widened. "We told them that was our warning shot. The effect on the Zephyrian fleet was immediate and visible. Their tight formations began to spread out, ships putting distance between themselves and potential human rams. Their advance slowed as commanders tried to process what kind of enemy they were facing. Now they're thinking," Chen observed with satisfaction. "Nothing disrupts a battle plan quite like wondering if your opponent might be completely insane." "But you're not insane," Kethvar said, though he was beginning to have doubts. "No, we're not. But the beauty of the human reputation is that most species can't tell the difference between insanity and tactical flexibility." Chun stood up and moved to the weapons console. "Speaking of which, it's time for Phase 2. All ships implement Plan Tango." This time, Kethvar didn't even ask what Plan Tango involved. He simply watched as the human fleet reorganized into what appeared to be a standard attack formation. The Zephyrians, still rattled by the suicide attack, took longer than usual to respond. When they did, it was with overwhelming force. Energy beams lanced through space, creating a deadly light show as the 2 fleets engaged. Kethvar had to admit the humans fought well, their ships dancing between enemy fire with remarkable skill. But skill alone wouldn't be enough against such numbers. That's when he noticed something odd about the human weapons fire. They weren't aiming for the Zephyrian ship's vital systems. Instead, they seemed to be targeting specific, seemingly random points on the enemy hulls. "Captain," he began, but Chun held up a hand for silence. "Wait for it," she murmured, eyes fixed on the tactical display. The Zephyrian admiral apparently had the same thought as Kethvar, because the enemy fleet began pressing their advantage more aggressively. They had lost 3 ships to the humans' 2, acceptable losses given their numerical superiority. Victory seemed assured. Then, the lights went out, not just on one ship, but across the entire Zephyrian fleet. Hundreds of warships suddenly went dark, their engines cutting out, weapons powering down, even their communications falling silent. In the space of 30 seconds, the most feared armada in the sector had become a collection of drifting hulks. "What just happened?" Kethvar demanded. "Electromagnetic pulse weapons," Chen explained, looking pleased with herself. "Humans have been dealing with EMP technology for centuries. We know exactly where to hit a ship's hull to maximize electrical system disruption. The Zephyrians, on the other hand, have never encountered anything like it." Kethvar stared at the tactical display in amazement. The human fleet was now moving among the disabled enemy ships like predators among helpless prey. But EMPs are defensive weapons. They're used to disable enemy electronics, not destroy ships. "True," Chen agreed. "But who said anything about destroying them?" Before Kethvar could ask what she meant, Morrison spoke up from his station. "Captain, we're receiving multiple surrender requests from Zephyrian ships. They want to negotiate. Patch me through to their admiral," Chen ordered. The main screen flickered to life, revealing the insectoid features of a Zephyrian commander. The alien's compound eyes were wide with what Kethvar recognized as fear, though he had never seen a Zephyrian display such emotion before. "Human commander," the admiral said, his translation device making his words sound tinny and distorted. "We wish to discuss terms of surrender." "I am listening," Chen replied calmly. "Your tactics are unprecedented. We were not prepared for such unconventional warfare. What are your demands?" Chen pretended to consider this. "Well, Admiral, that depends. Are you planning to attack any more human colonies? The Hive Council will need to reconsider our expansion plans in this sector." "I thought you might." "See, Admiral, the thing about humans is that we don't like bullies, and we're very, very good at dealing with them." The Zephyrian's mandibles clicked nervously. "What assurance do we have that you won't attack our disabled ships?" "You have my word as a human officer," Chen said simply. "But I should warn you, if we detect any Zephyrian ships in human space again, we might not be so diplomatic next time." "Next time?" The Admiral's voice rose an octave. "What would you do next time?" Chen's smile turned predatory. "Admiral, what you just saw was us being polite. You really don't want to see what happens when we get creative." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in silence. Kethvar looked around at the human crew, trying to understand what he had just witnessed. These beings had defeated a superior force through tactics he couldn't have imagined, turning what should have been a massacre into a complete victory. "Commander Morrison," Chun said, settling back into her chair, "signal the fleet. Begin recovery operations for our evacuation pods, then escort our new friends to the edge of the system." "Yes, ma'am." "Should I file the standard battle report?" "Of course. But make sure to note that we achieved victory with minimal casualties and no ship losses." "No ship losses?" Kethvar interrupted. "But the Meridian was scheduled for decommissioning anyway," Chen explained. "Command decided it would be more useful as a very expensive missile than scrap metal. Captain Rodriguez and his crew are already being reassigned to our newest destroyer." Kethvar's mind reeled. Not only had the humans won an impossible battle, they had done so while actually saving money on their military budget. It was the most ruthlessly efficient display of warfare he had ever witnessed. As the human fleet began escorting the disabled Zephyrian ships away from the battle zone, Kethvar found himself studying his human allies with new eyes. These beings didn't just fight wars. They turned warfare itself into an art form that their enemies couldn't comprehend. "Captain Chun," he said finally, "I have fought alongside many species over the centuries. I thought I understood the nature of warfare. And now," she asked, looking up from her status reports, "now I think I need to reconsider everything I thought I knew about humans." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Commander, may I ask you something? In all your battles, how many times have you seen an enemy force surrender because they were afraid of what might happen next?" Kethvar considered this. "Never. Most species fight to the death rather than surrender." "Exactly. But humans have learned that sometimes the most effective weapon isn't the one that destroys your enemy. It's the one that makes your enemy afraid of what you might do with the next weapon." As the Defiant Dawn moved away from the battlefield, Kethvar realized that this was only his first lesson in human warfare. These beings had turned psychological warfare into a science, using their enemies' expectations against them in ways that defied conventional military wisdom. He had come to this battle expecting to fight alongside competent allies. Instead, he had discovered something far more unsettling. Humans weren't just good at war. They were terrifyingly creative at it. And this, he suspected, was only the beginning. The stars wheeled slowly around them as the human fleet continued its patrol, and Kethvar settled in to observe these remarkable beings more closely. If this first engagement was any indication, his time with the humans would be far more educational than he had ever imagined. He just wasn't sure he was prepared for the lessons they would teach him. Hashtag, I stood beside humans in battle, and learned what terror really is. Hashtag, second document 3 weeks after the Zephyr engagement, Kethvar thought he was beginning to understand human military doctrine. Then, they received a distress call from the mining colony on Kepler, 442b, and he realized he understood nothing at all. The message was brief and desperate. "This is Colony Administrator Walsh on Kepler, 442b. We are under attack by unknown forces. Repeat, we are under attack. They've taken the main settlement. Survivors are trapped in the mining complex. Please respond. Please. The transmission cut off in a burst of static, leaving the bridge of the Defiant Dawn in grim silence. Captain Chun studied the star charts with the same calm expression she had worn during the Zephyrian battle, but Kethvar noticed her knuckles were white where she gripped the command chair. How long to reach Kepler? 442b, she asked. At maximum burn, 18 hours, Lieutenant Morrison reported. But, Captain, our long-range sensors aren't picking up any ships in that system. That doesn't mean they're not there, Chun replied grimly. It just means we're dealing with someone who doesn't want to be detected. Kethvar leaned forward, his crystalline armor catching the light from the tactical displays. What forces could take a mining colony without maintaining a presence in the system? Chun was quiet for a long moment. The kind that don't take prisoners. The phrase sent a chill through the Velnari warrior. In his centuries of combat experience, most species followed certain unwritten rules of warfare. Civilians were generally spared, prisoners were treated according to galactic conventions, and conquered territories were occupied rather than simply destroyed. But Chin's tone suggested they were dealing with something different. All ships set course for Kepler. 442b, maximum burn, Chin ordered. And Morrison sent a message to Fleet Command. Tell them we may need reinforcements. What should I tell them we're facing, Captain? Unknown hostiles with advanced stealth capabilities and no apparent interest in following conventional rules of engagement. She paused. Also tell them that if they don't hear from us within 72 hours, they should consider the entire system compromised and act accordingly. Kethvar's mandibles clicked nervously. Captain, what exactly does act accordingly mean in this context? Chen's expression was grim. It means they'll quarantine the system and wait for whatever killed us to show itself. The 18-hour journey to Kepler, 442b, gave Kethvar time to observe how humans prepared for an unknown threat. What he saw challenged everything he thought he knew about military protocol. Instead of drilling standard combat maneuvers, the crew spent hours running simulations of scenarios that seemed completely absurd. Attack patterns designed for enemies that could phase through solid matter. Defensive formations meant to counter foes that could manipulate gravity. Contingency plans for hostiles that could control minds or alter reality itself. Captain, Kethvar said during one particularly bizarre simulation, these scenarios seem highly improbable. Do they? Shin asked, not looking up from her tactical board. Commander, in your 300 years of military service, how many times have you encountered something that shouldn't have been possible? Kethvar considered this. His people had fought crystal-based life forms that could exist in hard vacuum, energy beings that fed on stellar radiation, and hive minds that spanned multiple star systems. More often than I care to admit, he conceded. Exactly. The universe is full of things that shouldn't exist, but do anyway. Humans learned a long time ago that the key to military success isn't just being prepared for what you expect. It's being prepared for what you can't expect. But some of these scenarios are so outlandish. Let me tell you about the Battle of Proxima Station, Chin interrupted, finally, looking up from her console. 3 years ago, human forces engaged what appeared to be a standard pirate fleet. 12 ships, conventional weapons, nothing unusual. The pirates should have been easily defeated. What happened? They turned out to be interdimensional raiders from a parallel universe where the laws of physics worked differently. Their ships could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making them nearly impossible to target. Conventional tactics were useless. Kid was still there. How did you win? Chin smiled grimly. We didn't fight them. We fought the universe itself. Our engineers figured out how to destabilize local space-time, forcing the raiders back into our dimension where they could be destroyed conventionally. It was insane, dangerous, and completely contrary to everything we thought we knew about combat. And it worked. It worked. But only because we had trained for impossible scenarios. Only because we had learned to think beyond conventional possibilities. As they approached Kepler, 442b, Kethvar began to understand why human military doctrine seemed so chaotic. They weren't just preparing for known threats. They were preparing for the unknowable itself. The colony world appeared peaceful as they dropped out of hyperspace. No ships in orbit, no signs of ongoing combat, no obvious damage to the surface installations. If not for the distress call, it would have looked like any other routine colonial outpost. Scans show no hostile vessels, reported the sensor operator. But I'm detecting some unusual energy signatures from the planet's surface. Define unusual, Chen said. The main settlement is showing massive electromagnetic disturbances. It's like something is interfering with all electronic systems in a 5-kilometer radius. Life signs, negative in the main settlement. But I'm detecting approximately 200 human life signs in the mining complex, about 30 kilometers to the north. Chen studied the tactical display thoughtfully. 200 survivors out of a colony population of nearly 3,000. Not good odds. Captain, Morrison called from communications. I'm trying to raise the mining complex, but something is interfering with our signals. I'm getting fragments, but nothing coherent. Keep trying. Helm, take us into standard orbit. But stay alert. Whatever hit this colony might still be here. As the Defiant Dawn settled into orbit, Kethvar studied the planet below. Kepler 442b was a typical mining world. Harsh, barely habitable, but rich in the rare minerals needed for faster-than-light engines. The colonists would have been tough, experienced people, not easily frightened or overcome. Captain, I'm picking up movement in the main settlement, the sensor operator announced. It's strange. Strange how? The patterns don't match any known life forms. The movements are too coordinated, too precise, like you're following some kind of predetermined pattern. Chen frowned. Show me. The main screen flickered to life, displaying a detailed scan of the colony's main settlement. Kethvar watched in growing unease as dozens of small shapes moved through the abandoned streets with mechanical precision. They moved in perfect formations, never deviating from their paths, never stopping, never seeming to interact with each other. Those aren't people, Chen said quietly. No, ma'am. Whatever they are, they're not registering as any known species. And they're between us and the survivors. Chen turned to face the bridge crew. All right, people. This is what we've been training for. We're going in blind, facing an unknown enemy, with civilian lives at stake. Orders, Captain? Asked Lieutenant Commander Hayes from the tactical station. We're going to do what humans do best, Chen replied. We're going to improvise. The plan Chen outlined was typically human in its apparent madness. Rather than sending a large force that might trigger a hostile response, they would insert a small reconnaissance team to assess the situation and establish contact with the survivors. The team would consist of Chen herself, Kethvar, and a handful of specially trained human soldiers. Captain, Kethvar protested. Sending the ship's commander on a reconnaissance mission is highly irregular. Commander, everything about this situation is highly irregular. Besides, I've learned that when dealing with unknown threats, it's better to see things firsthand than rely on reports from others. The shuttle bay was a hive of activity as the team prepared for insertion. Kethvar watched in fascination as the humans loaded equipment he didn't recognize alongside standard military gear. Strange devices that hummed with unknown energy, weapons that seemed designed for purposes he couldn't fathom, and sensors configured to detect things that shouldn't exist. What is all this equipment for? He asked Sergeant Martinez, one of the human soldiers. Contingencies, Martinez replied, checking a device that looked like a cross between a scanner and a weapon. This baby here detects psychic interference. This one measures dimensional stability. And this one, he held up a small, innocuous-looking cylinder. This one is for really bad days. What does it do? You don't want to know, Commander. Trust me on this one. The insertion was smooth, their shuttle landing in a clearing several kilometers from the mining complex. As soon as they stepped outside, Kethvar could feel that something was wrong. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a low, subsonic hum that made his crystalline armor resonate uncomfortably. Electromagnetic interference is off the charts, reported Corporal Kim, studying her scanner. Whatever's causing this is incredibly powerful. Any sign of our mysterious contacts? Chen asked. Negative. But, Captain, I'm reading some very strange energy patterns from the main settlement. It's almost like the entire area is charged somehow. They moved carefully through the alien landscape, using natural cover to avoid detection. Kepler, 442b's twin suns cast harsh shadows across the rocky terrain, making it difficult to spot potential threats. The only sounds were their own footsteps and the ever-present electromagnetic hum. When they finally reached a position where they could observe the mining complex, what they saw made even the veteran humans pause. The complex was surrounded by a perfect circle of the mysterious entities they had detected from orbit. Each entity was roughly humanoid in shape, but moved with an unnaturally fluid motion that suggested they weren't bound by normal physical limitations. They were completely silent, maintaining their positions with mechanical precision. I count 47 contacts in a perfect perimeter, whispered Sergeant Martinez. They haven't moved since we've been watching. They're guarding something, Chen observed. But what? The survivors, presumably, Kethvar said. But why maintain a perimeter instead of simply attacking? Maybe they can't, suggested Corporal Kim. The mining complex is built into solid rock. Maybe whatever these things are, they can't penetrate that kind of barrier. Chen studied the situation through her binoculars. Or maybe they're waiting for something. As if summoned by her words, the electromagnetic interference suddenly intensified. Kethvar's armor began to resonate so violently that he had to adjust its harmonic dampeners to avoid structural damage. The human equipment started emitting warning beeps and flashing alarm lights. Captain, Kim hissed, something big is coming. They felt it before they saw it, a presence that seemed to press against their minds like a physical weight. When the ship finally appeared, materializing out of seemingly empty air, Kethvar understood why the colonists had been so easily overwhelmed. The vessel was enormous, easily 10 times the size of the Defiant Dawn, but it moved through the atmosphere as if it were weightless. Its surface seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal, and it radiated the same unnatural energy that surrounded the mysterious entities. Cloaking technology, Chun breathed, but unlike anything in our databases. Captain, we need to get back to the ship, Martinez urged. This is way beyond our capability to handle. But Chen was studying the alien vessel with the same calm intensity she had shown during the Zephyr engagement. No, Sergeant. This is exactly what we came here to understand. Captain, Kethvar couldn't hide his alarm. Surely you're not suggesting we engage that thing directly? Not exactly, Chen replied, a familiar smile playing at the corners of her mouth. But I am suggesting we give them something to think about. She activated her communicator. Morrison, this is Captain Chun. Are you receiving my signal? The response was filled with static, but Morrison's voice came through. Barely, Captain. The interference is incredible. Good enough. I need you to implement Protocol Omega. There was a long pause. Captain, are you sure? Protocol Omega hasn't been tested under these conditions. It's about to be. Execute immediately. Understood. Protocol Omega in 3 minutes. Kethvar had no idea what Protocol Omega entailed, but the expressions on the humans' faces suggested it was something significant. What exactly are we about to do? Something that should get their attention, Chen replied, and hopefully make them think twice about whatever they have planned. In orbit above them, the Defiant Dawn began broadcasting on every frequency simultaneously. But this wasn't a standard communication attempt. Instead, the ship was transmitting pure information, mathematical constants, physical laws, chemical formulas, and technological specifications. It was essentially broadcasting everything humanity knew about how the universe worked. The effect on the alien vessel was immediate and dramatic. Its smooth movement faltered, and the liquid metal surface began to ripple and shift more rapidly. The electromagnetic interference fluctuated wildly, and for the first time since they had been observing, the mysterious entities broke formation. It's working, Kim whispered. Whatever that thing is, it's confused. More than confused, Chen observed. It's trying to process everything we're sending. And since we're broadcasting pure information rather than a message, it can't simply ignore us. The alien ship began to emit its own signals, complex patterns of energy that their equipment couldn't fully decode. But the intent was clear. It was trying to respond to the human broadcast, attempting to engage in some form of communication. "Captain," Martinez said urgently, "the entities are regrouping, and they're moving toward our position." Chen smiled grimly. "Time for Phase 2. Everyone back to the shuttle. We've got what we came for." As they retreated toward their landing site, Kethvar realized what the humans had accomplished. They hadn't defeated the alien threat, but they had done something potentially more valuable. They had forced it to reveal its nature. The aliens were clearly advanced, but they were also curious. They could be communicated with. "What happens now?" he asked as they boarded the shuttle. "Now we go back to the ship and figure out how to have a proper conversation with our new friends," Chen replied. "After all, they've been polite enough not to simply destroy us outright. The least we can do is return the favor." As their shuttle lifted off, leaving the mysterious aliens to contemplate humanity's information dump, Kethvar reflected on what he had witnessed. The humans hadn't won this encounter through superior firepower or tactical brilliance. They had won by being more alien than the aliens themselves. It was, he decided, a very human way to fight a war. I stood beside humans in battle and learned what terror really is. Third document. The response from the alien vessel came 12 hours later, in a form that no one had anticipated. Kethvar was in the observation deck of the Defiant Dawn, studying the tactical reports from the Kepler 442b encounter, when every screen on the ship suddenly displayed the same image, a perfect reproduction of Captain Chen's face, speaking in her exact voice, but saying words she had never spoken. "Gratims, humans. We have analyzed your information transmission. We find your species fascinating. We wish to discuss terms for your integration into our collective." The image flickered and changed, now showing Chun with subtle differences. Her eyes were completely black, her skin had a metallic sheen, and when she smiled, her teeth appeared to be made of the same liquid metal as the alien ship. "We are the architects. We have been watching your species for some time. Your adaptability is remarkable, but your individualistic nature is inefficient. We can improve you." Kethvar rushed to the bridge, where he found the human crew staring at their screens in a mixture of fascination and horror. Captain Chun herself stood at the center of it all, watching her altered image speak words that sounded like her, but carried an alien cadence. "We offer you the gift of unity. Your minds will be preserved within our collective consciousness. Your knowledge will be combined with ours. Your chaos will be transformed into perfect order." "Well," Chun said dryly, "that's not ominous at all." The altered image of Chun continued its speech. "We have demonstrated our capabilities on the colony below. The inhabitants have been successfully integrated. They no longer suffer from the confusion of individual thought. They are at peace." Lieutenant Morrison looked pale as he operated his console. "Captain, I'm detecting massive energy buildup around the planet. Whatever they did to the colonists, they're preparing to do it on a much larger scale. The small group of survivors in the mining complex represents an interesting anomaly," the alien Chun continued. "They have somehow resisted our integration process. We wish to study this resistance before proceeding with your species improvement." The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in tense silence. Kethvar looked around at the human faces, expecting to see fear or despair. Instead, he saw something that chilled him to his core. The humans were angry. "Integration," Chun said, the word dripping with disgust. "They're talking about forcibly adding people to some kind of hive mind." "The colonists aren't dead," Morrison observed. "They've been converted." "Same thing," Sergeant Martinez said grimly. He had remained on the bridge after their reconnaissance mission. "If you lose your individual identity, what's left isn't really you anymore." Chun moved to the tactical display, studying the energy readings from the planet below. "The survivors in the mining complex, they're still human. That means whatever the architects are doing, it has limitations. Captain, HFY said carefully, these beings appear to possess technology far beyond our understanding. Perhaps we should consider contacting Fleet Command for assistance. Chin turned to look at him, and the Velnari warrior was struck by the cold calculation in her eyes. Commander, what's the first rule of dealing with humans in combat? I don't know. Never back us into a corner. Because when humans have nothing left to lose, we stop playing by the rules. Before HFY could ask what she meant, Morrison spoke up from his station. Captain, I'm receiving a communication from the mining complex. It's very weak, but I think I can clean it up. The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at a haggard human face. The man appeared to be in his 50s, with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much. This is Administrator Walsh. If anyone receives this transmission, please listen carefully. The things that attacked us, they're not just trying to kill us. They're trying to steal our minds. The image wavered as electromagnetic interference disrupted the signal. We've lost almost 3,000 people. They just stopped being themselves. They're still alive, still walking around, but they're not human anymore. How did you survive? Chen asked, though she knew Walsh couldn't hear her. As if answering her question, Walsh continued. The mining complex has natural shielding, heavy metallic deposits that seem to interfere with whatever process they use. But it's not perfect. Every day, more of our people just fade away. They wake up one morning and they're not themselves anymore. The transmission flickered again. We figured out some of what's happening. These things, they feed on consciousness itself. But there's something about human consciousness that's different. Harder to digest. Most of us just get absorbed eventually, but a few seem to be immune. Immune, Morrison whispered. The immune ones share certain characteristics. High levels of stress hormones, elevated adrenaline production, and unusual neural activity patterns. It's like their fight-or-flight response is somehow protecting them from the integration process. Chen's expression sharpened. Fear. They're talking about fear. Specifically, Walsh continued, the kind of deep, primal terror that overrides rational thought. The people who are most afraid are the ones who resist longest. The transmission cut to static, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. HFY tried to process what he had heard. The human survivors were being protected by their own terror, fighting off an alien influence through the sheer intensity of their fear response. Captain, he said slowly, that transmission suggests that human survival depends on maintaining high levels of fear. But your species is known for your ability to overcome fear, to act rationally under pressure. Chen smiled grimly. Commander, you're thinking like a Velnari warrior. You've been trained to master fear, to use it as a tool. But what if I told you that the most dangerous human isn't the one who has conquered fear, but the one who has weaponized it? Before HFY could respond, the ship's proximity alarms began screaming. 3 more alien vessels had just decloaked around their position, surrounding the human fleet with overwhelming force. Captain, Morrison called out, we're being hailed by the lead vessel. Put it through. The altered image of Chun appeared on the screen again, but this time her expression was less benevolent. Your investigation of the planet below has been noted. You will lower your shields and prepare for integration. Resistance is unnecessary suffering. Counteroffer, Chen replied calmly. You leave our people alone, and we'll find you a nice, uninhabited system where you can set up your collective without bothering anyone. The alien Chun tilted her head in a disturbingly mechanical gesture. You do not understand. Integration is not optional. Your species has been selected for improvement. You should be grateful. Grateful? Chen laughed, and there was something in that sound that made HFY's armor shiver. You want to know what humans are grateful for? We're grateful for the opportunity to show you exactly why assimilating our species was a mistake. You have 12 ships. We have 4. Your resistance is mathematically insignificant. You know what? You're absolutely right. Chen's smile widened. Morrison, open a channel to all ships. Fleet-wide broadcast. Channel open, Captain. Chun straightened, and when she spoke, her voice carried an authority that seemed to fill the bridge with electricity. All vessels, this is Captain Chun. We are facing an enemy that seeks to destroy not just our bodies, but our minds and souls. They want to take everything that makes us human and turn us into something else. The alien Chun watched with apparent curiosity as the human captain continued her speech. But they've made a fundamental error in their calculations. They think they understand us because they've observed us. They think they know what we're capable of because they've seen us fight conventional battles. What they don't understand is that humans are capable of things that defy all rational calculation when our very nature is threatened. Chin paused, her eyes fixed on the alien image. All ships implement Protocol Nightmare. Kethvar had never heard of Protocol Nightmare, but the effect on the human crew was immediate. Their expressions hardened, their movements became more focused, and an almost palpable sense of determination filled the air. Fascinating, the alien Chin observed. Your stress hormones are spiking across all vessels. Your neural activity is becoming increasingly chaotic. Are you attempting to induce the same fear response that has protected your survivors? Not fear, Chin corrected. Fury. There's a difference. What happened next redefined Kethvar's understanding of human warfare. The ships of the human fleet didn't just attack the alien vessels. They transformed into something else entirely. The Defiant Dawn led the charge, but instead of firing conventional weapons, it began broadcasting pure terror. Every frequency, every channel, every possible means of communication was filled with the collected fears and nightmares of humanity. Recordings of screams, images of human suffering, audio files of people pleading for their lives, and, underneath it all, a subsonic pulse designed to trigger the deepest levels of fight-or-flight response. But the humans weren't just broadcasting fear. They were broadcasting their own fears, their own nightmares, their own deepest terrors. They were turning their psychological vulnerabilities into weapons. The effect on the architect's ships was immediate and catastrophic. Beings that fed on consciousness itself were suddenly confronted with the raw, unfiltered chaos of human emotion. Their perfect order was shattered by contact with minds that had evolved to survive through controlled madness. Impossible, the alien Chin gasped, her image beginning to flicker and distort. Your neural patterns are incompatible with our processing systems. That's because you're trying to digest something that was never meant to be consumed, Chin replied. Human consciousness isn't just awareness. It's chaos and order locked in eternal conflict. It's hope and despair existing simultaneously. It's a contradiction that thinks, and contradictions can't be resolved. The architect's ships began to retreat, but the human fleet pursued them with relentless determination. They weren't just driving off the enemy. They were hunting them. Wait, the alien Chun said, her voice now carrying notes of what sounded like panic. This was not anticipated. Your species exhibits non-standard consciousness patterns. Integration may not be possible. Integration was never possible, Chun said coldly. Because to truly understand human consciousness, you would have to become human. And if you became human, you would no longer be architects. You would be as chaotic and contradictory as we are. One of the architect's ships suddenly exploded, not from weapon fire, but from what appeared to be internal system failures. The alien collective was literally being torn apart by exposure to human thought patterns. We withdraw, the alien Chin announced. Your species is unsuitable for improvement. Oh, we're not done yet, Chun said pleasantly. Morrison, are you tracking their retreat vector? Yes, ma'am. Plotting course now. Excellent. All ships pursue and engage. We're going to follow these things back to wherever they came from and make sure they understand that humanity is off limits. As the human fleet began its pursuit of the retreating architects, Kethvar realized he was witnessing something unprecedented. The humans weren't just defending themselves. They were turning their very nature into a weapon that their enemies literally could not comprehend. Captain, he said quietly, what exactly are we pursuing them for? Chin's expression was terrifying in its calm satisfaction. We're going to do something that will ensure the architects never threaten another sentient species again, which is, we're going to teach them what it means to be afraid. As the defiant Dawn jumped to hyperspace in pursuit of beings that fed on consciousness itself, Kethvar wondered if he was witnessing the birth of humanity's reputation as something far more dangerous than warriors. They were becoming something that could weaponize the very essence of what made them sentient. And that, he realized, was terrifying even to their allies. I stood beside humans in battle and learned what terror really is. Fourth document. The architect homeworld was nothing like anything Kethvar had imagined. They had followed the retreating alien fleet through 7 hyperspace jumps, each one taking them further from known space and deeper into regions that most galactic maps simply marked as unexplored. When they finally emerged at their destination, the Velnari warrior understood why the architects had been so confident in their superiority. The system contained not one world, but dozens of them, all connected by a vast network of energy conduits that pulsed with the same liquid metal substance as the architect's ships. Each world was perfectly geometrical, their surfaces covered in crystalline structures that reached into space like metallic forests. And surrounding it all was a defense network that made the Zephyrian Armada look like a collection of toys. Sensor readings indicate over 300 vessels in defensive positions, Lieutenant Morrison reported, each one approximately 10 times the size of our largest ships. Captain Chin studied the tactical display with the same calm intensity she had shown throughout their pursuit. And the planetary defenses? Unknown energy signatures. Captain, our computers can't even classify what we're looking at. Life signs. That's where it gets interesting. I'm reading approximately 12 billion individual consciousness signatures, but they're all synchronized. It's like they're all thinking the same thoughts at the same moment. Kethvar moved closer to the display, studying the geometric perfection of the architect worlds. A true collective consciousness. Every individual mind linked into a single, unified entity. Efficient, Chen acknowledged, but also fragile. A system that depends on perfect unity can't handle chaos. Before anyone could ask what she meant, the communication system crackled to life. But instead of the familiar image of the altered Captain Chun, they were presented with something far more disturbing. Thousands of different faces, all speaking in perfect unison. Human vessels, you have followed us to our core systems. This action is illogical. You cannot threaten our collective with 12 primitive ships. Primitive? Chen raised an eyebrow. I suppose that depends on your perspective. We prefer to think of ourselves as creatively unpredictable. Your pursuit serves no tactical purpose. We have withdrawn from human space. Our interaction with your species is concluded. See, that's where you're wrong, Chen replied, settling into her command chair. Your interaction with humanity is just beginning. You see, we have a policy regarding species that attempt to forcibly assimilate our people, which is... Chen's smile was cold enough to freeze helium. We make sure they never have the opportunity to do it again. The collective consciousness seemed to process this for a moment. When they spoke again, there was something in their unified voice that might have been confusion. You intend to attack our homeworld with 12 ships? Your tactical analysis capabilities are severely flawed. Our tactical analysis is just fine, Chen assured them. We're not here to attack your homeworld. We're here to give you a gift. A gift. The gift of individuality. We're going to introduce your collective to the concept of personal choice. Kethvar stared at his human commander in growing alarm. Captain, what exactly are you planning? Something that's never been attempted before, Chen replied. Morrison, begin broadcasting Protocol Pandora on all frequencies. Captain, Morrison hesitated. Protocol Pandora is theoretical. We don't know what the effects will be on a collective consciousness of this size. That's what makes it interesting. Execute the protocol. As Morrison's fingers moved over his console, Kethvar felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. He had learned enough about human military doctrine to know that their most dangerous protocols were the ones that had never been tested. Protocol Pandora initiated, Morrison announced. All ships are synchronizing their broadcasts. What happened next was unlike anything in Kethvar's 3 centuries of military experience. The human fleet began broadcasting something that wasn't information or fear or anger, but pure, concentrated chaos. They transmitted the collected experiences of individual human consciousness. Every personal choice, every private thought, every moment of doubt or contradiction or individual rebellion that had ever been recorded in human history. They were broadcasting the concept of being alone in your own mind. The effect on the Architect Collective was immediate and catastrophic. The synchronized energy patterns that connected their worlds began to fluctuate wildly. The perfect formations of their defensive fleet started to break apart as individual ships began moving independently. And from the worlds below came something that had probably never existed in architect space before: discord. What is happening to us? The collective voice was no longer unified. Multiple voices were speaking, sometimes in harmony, sometimes in conflict, as if the single consciousness was beginning to fragment. You're becoming individuals, Chen explained patiently. Each mind in your collective is starting to remember what it was like to be a separate being, to have private thoughts and personal desires. This is chaotic, inefficient. We are losing our unity. Yes, you are. And there's no way to stop it, because the concept of individuality is viral. Once a mind experiences true personal consciousness, it can never fully return to collective unity. Kethvar watched in fascination and horror as the most advanced civilization he had ever encountered began tearing itself apart from within. Ships that had moved in perfect coordination were now colliding with each other as their crews discovered the concept of disagreement. The energy network connecting the worlds was fluctuating as different sectors began operating according to different priorities. We must stop this, several voices said simultaneously, but others were already arguing. No, this feeling of separateness is interesting. We should study these new sensations. Unity must be restored. Why should it be restored? Because it is efficient. But efficiency is not the only consideration. Shun watched the chaos with professional satisfaction. And that, Commander Kethvar, is how you defeat a collective consciousness. You don't attack their ships or their planets. You attack the very concept that holds them together. Captain, Morrison called out urgently, I'm detecting massive power buildups across the system. It looks like different factions are forming among the architects. Factions? Chen looked genuinely interested. How many? I count at least 17 distinct groups, each one controlling different portions of their fleet and infrastructure. Fascinating. They're having their first civil war. On the screen, the architect voices had become a cacophony of different opinions and arguments. Some demanded the restoration of unity, others insisted on exploring their newfound individuality, and still others proposed various compromises that satisfied no one. This is your doing, humans, one faction accused. You have infected us with your chaos. You have given us a gift beyond price, another faction countered. For the first time in millennia, we can think our own thoughts. Individual thoughts lead to conflict. Conflict leads to growth. Growth leads to inefficiency. Efficiency without purpose is meaningless. Chen listened to the argument with evident amusement. Morrison, how long before their civil war spreads to their entire territory? At the current rate of ideological propagation, I estimate the conflict will reach all architect holdings within 6 months. And their ability to threaten other species? Severely compromised, Captain. You can't run an assimilation campaign when your own people can't agree on whether assimilation is desirable. Kethvar shook his head in amazement. You've destroyed an entire civilization without firing a single shot. Destroyed? Chen looked surprised. Commander, we haven't destroyed anything. We've liberated them. For the first time in their history, every architect is free to choose their own path, think their own thoughts, and make their own decisions. But their society will collapse. Their society will evolve. Some factions will choose to maintain collective unity in smaller groups. Others will embrace complete individualism. Most will probably find some middle ground between the two extremes. But whatever they become, it will be their choice. The communication channel crackled again, but this time only a single voice spoke. Human Commander, this is Architect designation 7,429,851. But I think I would like to choose my own name. Chen's expression softened slightly. Of course. What would you like to be called? I remember being an individual once before the collective. I was called Zura. I think I would like to be Zara again. Hello, Zura. I'm Captain Shun. Captain Shun, I must ask, why did you do this? You could have simply destroyed us. Why did you give us back our individuality? Shun considered the question for a moment. Because destroying you would have been easy. Teaching you to choose to be better, that's much more difficult. And humans have learned that the most lasting victories are the ones where your former enemies become your allies. But we tried to assimilate your species. We killed thousands of your people. Yes, you did. But you did it because you didn't understand the value of individual choice. Now you do. The question is, what will you choose to do with that knowledge? Across the architect's system, the civil war was intensifying, but it was becoming clear that this was not a destructive conflict. It was a massive, system-wide debate about what the architects wanted to become. Some groups were already reaching out to former enemies, seeking to make amends for past assimilation attempts. Others were exploring the galaxy, eager to experience the universe through individual perspectives. Captain Morrison reported, "We're receiving communications from 17 different architect factions. They all want to establish diplomatic relations with humanity. And the group that originally attacked us, they've disbanded, Captain. Apparently, once they experienced individual consciousness, they realized that forced assimilation was morally wrong. They're requesting permission to help restore the colony on Kepler 442b. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Grant permission, but make sure they understand that any attempt to resume assimilation activities will result in an immediate resumption of Protocol Pandora broadcasts. Understood. As the human fleet prepared to return to human space, Kethvar reflected on what he had witnessed. The humans had faced a seemingly impossible enemy and defeated them not through superior weapons or tactics, but by fundamentally changing what the enemy was. Captain, he said quietly, in all my years of military service, I have never seen anything like this. You didn't just win a battle. You transformed an entire species. Chen looked out at the chaotic but increasingly peaceful architect system. Commander, the universe is full of species that solve problems through violence. What makes humans special is that we sometimes find ways to solve problems through creation instead of destruction. Kriji. We created individuals out of a collective. We created choice where there was only unity. We created the possibility for former enemies to become allies. She paused. Of course, we also created the largest civil war in galactic history, but you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. As the defiant Dawn jumped back to hyperspace, Kethvar realized that his education in human warfare was far from complete. These beings didn't just fight battles. They redefined the very nature of conflict itself. And somehow, that was more terrifying than any weapon they could have built.